Yeah, good morning. Let us resume our discussion. So in the last class, we discussed about AdaGrad, RMS prop, and Adam optimizers. And what else did we discuss in the last class? A couple of other points we have discussed.
We discussed early stopping.
Okay, early stop. Okay, what else?
Nastro optimization also we discussed.
Yeah, Nastro momentum term. Instead of taking the momentum with the gradient at the current location, we take the gradient at the location given by the velocity term in addition to the gradient term at that location. So that's the Nastro momentum. So momentum is taken with gradient at the current weight location added with the like the previous momentum term. That's an Nastro momentum. Okay, what else did we discuss? We discussed about optimizers, different optimization techniques in learning neural networks or in backpropagation, for backpropagation. What else did we discuss?
The last something we discussed model ensemble.
Yeah, we discussed about model ensemble. So that's where what we will be doing is we average the scores of different models with different initializations. That's one way. Same model with different initializations also is fine. That's one way. So what happens is in each of the cases, you are initializing at different locations of the cost function, and the local minima also may be different. Okay, and there may be reasonably good local minima. So you are in some sense balancing the scores to see which is a appropriate minima for the cost function or which is appropriate class level for the samples. We also have discussed about a cyclic rate, cyclic learning rates. So with the help of learning rate, how do we handle the like change the dynamics of learning? So we can see that the convergence happens smoothly if we keep reducing the learning rate. But once we increase the learning rate, again, it moves or oscillates over the cost space. Okay, and then again, you can decrease slowly so that it will settle around a slightly better local minima, we assume. Okay, like that we can do for a couple of times. So this is one way of doing model ensemble. Okay, so this is one way of doing, in some sense, enforcing the regularization or giving different exploring the cost space essentially, effectively. Okay, so the other techniques, I am sharing the screen. So there are other couple of techniques for regularization. Regularization is important, as we discussed, because if we have a neural network learning task through neural network, there is not a single solution that's very optimal. So in fact, the cost space is very vast with the number of parameters we have, and searching in the cost space to reach out to the global minima is very difficult. And there may be multiple solutions which may be of reasonably of say may have the same cost. So to have the better solution among these multiple solutions having the same cost, what we usually do is to employ a regularization term, right? So we have discussed about formal way of bringing in regularization terms before. So what are the regularization terms that we usually employ? Can you quickly tell? So L total, for example, okay, is equal to, if we consider L some whatever class entropy or any classification loss, okay, plus lambda times the regularization loss. Okay, it's not regression, regularization. Okay, so now L, we can also call it as LR, assume that. So what's the LR usually we use? Classification plus lambda times regression. Okay, it's not regression, regularization. So what is regularization loss? How do we define it? We have discussed before, right? So can you quickly bring the final essential points from that? What are the regularization terms we use?
L1, L2 norms. Okay.
Yeah, L1, L2 norm of what? L1, L2 norm of? Please tell quickly. Yeah, Major Pradeep. Yes. Yeah, Prabhat.
Weight size.
Yeah, that's all. So what you people are thinking? You don't want to tell or what? So the L1 norm of all weight elements. Okay. So this is one kind of regularization. I and J and summation over all this. This is one kind of regularization. Or we can use, okay, regularization can be L2 norm. It's in fact IJ, when I mention it is double summation only. So you can consider a whole square, no, and then square root. So you can consider in either way. So it we even this instead of writing like this, they people also use matrix norms, since W is a matrix. Okay, so they can use some kind of matrix norms. So in either of the case, we enforce on the regularization on the weight elements. Okay. This is one way of enforcing regularization. So this may select a solution which is sparse, and this may select a solution which is what kind of solution do you think it selects?
Distributed.
Yeah, distributed solution. Okay, solution for what? W. Okay, so this will select like that. So this is what sparse in W. Right. So this is one way of enforcing regularization, and using with the help of regularization, selecting a particular W. Okay, that W star, okay, is now not just minimum of L cross entropy, okay, but also minimum of cross entropy plus, okay, lambda times L regularization. Okay, fine. So this will be more opt, because we may have many solutions even with cross entropy, and we will be taking one of the best solution, even also guided by regularization. See, the other way of enforcing regularization or model ensemble, more importantly, is through dropouts. Dropouts, see, in a feed-forward neural network, if we consider, so there are several neurons, right? So what usually will happen? Each neuron to neuron will have interconnections, right? And then the output neuron values will come. So see, dropout means what we do is we drop the we can drop the neuron itself. That means assume that the neuron output, whatever we get, say you may get some output here, right? So whatever output you get from here, Yj, okay, for arbitrary or random neurons, I will put to 0 with some dropout probability. If I say that dropout probability, okay, dp, if I call dropout probability, is equal to 0.5. Okay, so this is dropout probability. Then what do I mean? So Yj is equal to 0 for say with a probability of j picking with 0.5. So what I do is, so j varies from 1 to assume that 50. Okay, so 50 hidden neurons. In that case, what I do, I generate a random variable, okay, with a probability of dp, that is 0.5. So the random variable will be taking a values. Say if I consider this random variable as say x or whatever, or jp, for example, or yeah, whatever, j hat. Okay, this j hat will be taking values. How many times I draw? If it is 0.5 probability, I will be drawing for half of the times. Okay, so it may be 2, 8, okay, 3, something like this. I will draw for 25 times. right? Because with the probability of dropout probability of 0.5 means I will draw for these times. Then what do I do now? Yj equal to 0, or yj hat equal to 0 for all j hats. This is what I do. Okay, and then I will do the subsequent operations with these replaced values of j hat. So yj is replaced by yj hat. Okay, is this clear? This is how we enforce, or we bring in dropouts. Is this clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So same thing happens, say at any layer. It need not be at the first layer. It can be at any layer. Okay, so I am just skipping the drawings at the intermediate things. But you can assume that it's all there at all the layers. Right. So this is referred to as dropout. And see what's the advantage of this. So what we see randomly, for example, now first initially I may consider, if I consider only 4 neurons. Okay, so what will happen? Essentially, among the 4 neurons, say at the with the probability of 0.5, I'm drawing a random variable. So what may happen actually? So at any location, the value of it being 1 is also 0.5. Okay, so it can be 1 or 0 with value of 0.5. That's one way of interpreting. So in that case, what happens? See, if I write y is equal to, say if we have 4 neurons here, okay, just to write mathematically. So w1 into x1 plus w2 into x2 plus w3 into x3 plus w4 into x4. Okay, so this is one of the particular output. Find the w1 to w4, x1 to x4. Assume that got connected to y1. Okay, in this way. So this is w11. I have to write more specifically w11, w12, and so on. Okay, but I hope you can understand. So w11 or w21, w31, w41. Okay, hope this is clear. Now what happens at every neuron, if we consider the probability of this output being 0, okay, is what this being 0 is 0.5. So what may happen? Half the times this will be 0, half the times this will be 1. Okay, so in that way, what will happen? So you can see that this is 0 for half the times. Okay, you can consider w11 into x1, w21. Say the other way of interpreting is half of these will be 0 at any given point of time. So wx2 plus w31 x3 plus w41 into 0. So w again you can do this for w11 into 0 plus w21 into 0 plus w31 into x3 plus w41 into x4. Like this you can do for say how many times you can do this. So you can probably do 4 times. Okay, so overall we see that actually half the times any of the neuron will be involved in calculating the output. So each of the time what we are doing essentially each of the time we are using different combinations, right? And that is being decided randomly. So each time we are doing different model. So it's a model ensemble that is happening. Okay, and the model ensemble means average of different models is what is the output we are getting. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is, while training we do like this. While testing, what do we do? While testing, all the neurons will be active, right? So if all the neurons are active in testing, we can't use the output y is equal to y1 is equal to like this. So in testing, we should translate this to, or we should from here. Okay, in testing, what should we do? Any idea? Y1 should be equal to in testing. Okay, what should be? Should I write this w1 x1 plus w2 x2 plus w3 x3 w4 x4? Because the dropout probability is 0.5. what we do is anyway at the 0.5 number of neurons are only active at any time. So what we should do is the W1 X1 plus W12 X2 plus W or W21 X1 X2 plus W31 X3 plus W41 X4 into what? Probability of dropout. Okay, dropout probability we should multiply, because if dropout probability is 0.5, only half of the neurons are active. If dropout probability is 0.25, then only out of 4, only 1 neuron will be active at any time. Okay, so what should we do is in testing, we should multiply this, okay, with the dropout probability to calculate the corresponding outputs. Okay, this is in testing only. Okay, in training, what we do, randomly you pick this, you make the output 0, okay, with that given dropout probability and use subsequent steps in subsequent step. And this can be enforced at any layer, as I said. So you can enforce here or you can enforce here. So if you have actually 10 layer network, at all the 10 layers or at some layers, you can enforce this. Okay. So this is probability. No. So the other one is drop connect. So what?
Just one question.
Yeah. Yeah, please tell.
Yeah, sir. So here, why do we actually multiply with the probability, the dropout probability?
Testing, right?
Yes, sir. Because what if the other weights are actually 0? So multiplying will actually reduce.
What happens is, see, if I do large number of runs, in sense that large number of iterations, okay, what is expected? So each of the neuron, if we see, this is active for half of the times. Is it not? Because dropout probability is 0.5. If dropout probability is 1/4, each of the neuron is active for 1/4 times. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
And even among all the neurons, 1/4 of neurons are only effectively active at any time. Right?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, in test, but if one time this may be active, one time this may be active, one time this may be active. Okay, other neuron may be active. So each of the weights of the neurons or connections are being updated. So we are not knocking off any of the neuron all the time. Okay, they are all interchangeably on and off based on the dropout probabilities. So effectively what's happening? So each of the neuron, like each W, J case, okay, all are updated. Only thing is it may be updated only for 1/4 number of times if dropout probability is 1/4. Okay, all the weights associated with it are updated only 1/4 number of times. Okay, so if dropout probability is 1/4. So that's the reason why, but the weights are updated as it is. We are not there, we are doing 1/4 times of and whatever. Okay, so while testing, what do? We don't have a provision to drop half of these things. We need to use all the neurons, right? So because all are effectively trained. We can't give preference of one neuron over other in testing. So we use all of them. However, effectively the output, whenever we calculate, see output here at any time is only say function of 2 of them. So it's not say out of all 4. Okay, the Y1, if I consider again, Y1, Y2, okay, Y3, Y4, okay, 4 like this, okay, and then corresponding W vector here, okay, for output, any of the output O1, then what happens? Among these things, only 2 are active at any time. So output is effectively calculated in training with only 2, not with 4. So to take care of that, we multiply with the dropout probability.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is active, this is non-active, this is again active, this may not be active. Other combination is not active, like this. So at any time, only 2 are active. Okay, like that. So because of that, we in training, we are only output is mapped to half of this. Okay, when we use all 4, we have to multiply with the dropout probability. Hope it is clear.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, the other one is drop connect. Drop connect is what? See, dropout, as we said, we drop the neurons here. Okay, drop the neuron. Essentially, drop the neuron means what? Drop the output of neuron. We make the output of neuron to 0. Okay, so but drop connect means a particular connection is what we will be dropping. So any of the WJK, okay, is made equal to 0. So WJK is hat or whatever is made equal to 0. So we will be effectively it's not connected with a neuron now. So what may happen? A neuron may have connections with all the output neurons, right? So all the weights need not be dropped. All the connections need not be dropped. Only this connection can be dropped and other connections with this neuron may be active. Similarly, this connection may be dropped and all other connections may be active. That's drop connect. Okay. In such case also we will be dropping, say, drop connect with say probability of 0.5 means that we will be dropping half of the connections. Okay. Here also we will be dropping half of the connections. Okay. So what happens effectively, we will be doing only half the connections. Okay. In training. That means here we are dropping now these things. Okay. Effectively. Instead of dropping these things, now we are dropping these things. Okay, dropping these things means at randomly we are not using them. Okay, but we are not making them completely 0. Please make a note of it. Okay, we are only doing at that instance, we are not using them. Okay, so that means the previous weight, whatever we have, we will not make to 0. We will not be using in that instance. Next time when we use it, we will update from the previous location where it is. Hope this is clear. And that is drop connect. Okay, these are also widely used because this helps us to ensemble different with the same model itself. We are bringing so many different models. Okay, of course, with the same structure. It's like there is a history of what it has learned also in it. But still it is a model ensemble. Hope this is clear.
Yes.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so the this is regarding the regularization. Let's now quickly browse through some of the slides, and then we will come back and discuss on the neural network architectures. So how the neural network architectures have been evolved. So we will see, so far we have seen training and the use of different training tips or tricks to learn or to traverse in the cost function better. Okay, now we will see architectural aspects, how the evolution of convolutional neural networks mainly has happened, and some of the applications of the convolutional neural networks. That's the next set of topics that we discuss. So these are the slides from Professor Fifi Lee team. So few like I will quickly browse through some of the aspects that we discussed today. So as you can see, we can enforce either L1 regularization or L2 regularization or both as well. So this is what is dropouts that we have discussed. As you can see, it's very well pictorially depicted. So you can see that at any given time, half the neurons are made inactive. Okay, so they don't participate in further subsequent connections, establishing subsequent connections, and hence like the network is essentially a different network, okay, than the complete network that we use, and each time it's a different network, and average of that is what we are essentially, or ensemble of that is what we are essentially getting as final scores or final probabilities. So as we discussed in training, this is what we do. In testing, we multiply with the dropout probability. So the analogy is like this: when we drop some of these things, say what essentially may happen is, it's an ideal case. So some of the times it may be selectively taking the features of only that particular class. So having tail and class, for example, may be good for cat class. So it essentially takes the scores for the cat class high and trains them well. Okay, so the other things may or may not be applicable to this class, and they will be knocked off at least during that time. So it's like that. So it may also selectively help in better classification or adapt the features to that class. of that class. Yeah, it's dropouts is ensemble of model and so on. So we can also show a little bit of mathematically that when we bring in dropout, essentially why we are in training phase, what is that it's happening. If we consider all the possibilities of, if we consider W1 and W2, this with drop connect they have given, but I think it's essentially same for dropout as well. So 1 by 4 times, because we have 4 possibilities, 1 by 4 they have written. And then different combinations, if we see, essentially, this is what is dropout probability. So either it will be on or off among all the possibilities. Yeah. So this is how in code they will introduce dropout probability. So they will see that if the probability is lesser than 0.5, it will fire, or it lesser than 0.5 or 1 by 4, whatever dropout probability, it will fire, otherwise it doesn't fire, like that. And multiply with the dropout probability during test time. Yeah. Essentially, the other important thing that will help in regularization or in better training is the data augmentation. So what's data augmentation? See, what usually is needed is for training, especially convolutional neural networks, we need large amount of data. So unless we have enough data, training convolution, because convolutional neural networks essentially has many layers, usually they are deeper. And the number of parameters, trainable parameters are also very high. Learnable parameters are also very high. And further, this demands large data for training. And usually what we do, we want to extract features also through the convolutional neural network. It's not that we are giving a handcrafted features and only doing classification with respect using the convolutional neural networks. Okay. Given all that, so we need large data for training. So there are different ways in which the training data can be effectively used. So one way of doing it is, say if we have the training data with us, so and if it is not sufficient to train a convolutional neural network, so if you want, say the same data, whatever we have, can be effectively used through some kind of data augmentation techniques like flipping, cropping. I am sharing again. Yeah, through flipping, cropping, or intensity variations, or scale little bit of rotations or view variations. View variations, especially, we need little more like involved or complex models to perform it. But the other operations are quite simple, and most of the times they are very effective in bringing up the data. Even though there is a even though there is some kind of bias that is introduced through data augmentation of that particular class, still it's widely used because it gives at least a span of our variability of the data. And then there are other techniques to overcome or to compensate for the bias. Yeah. So here are some of the visual aspects of data augmentation. As you can see here, it's flip of the cat and then intensity variations. So these you can do through image processing, say contrast enhancement methods or contrast stretching methods. That means one of the region in 0 to 255, okay, will be stretched a little more, or you can equally distribute the intensity or gray levels between 0 to 255. Or you can probably stretch some region and say some of the region can be compressed in intensity to get a different look. These are all intensity based variations. Similarly, you can also do like flipping, horizontal flip, crops, and so on. So this is also widely used technique for effective learning of convolution neural networks. So these are all the techniques usually are employed. So the other important aspect are the very like remarkable feature of convolutional neural networks is transfer learning. I hope many of you know what is transfer learning. Transfer learning means, say for example, if I train a neural network with some data set. So one of the very well-known data set is ImageNet data set, which has 1,000 classes and 1.5 million images. And in fact, it has even more, 14 million images. And 1.5 million images are usually used for ImageNet challenge. So large scale image recognition challenge. And if we train a neural network with that, it's one of the very big data for training a classification task. But usual classification tasks that we may wish to do may not be with that kind of images. Say I may wish to do some kind of say blood cell classification, or we may wish to do say pneumonia versus non-pneumonia using chest X-rays, or different classification. Even in natural images, we may wish to classify the classes which are not there in 1,000 classes. But what we can do usually is, which is the model that is trained, or the CNN convolutional neural network that is trained on this very big data, can be used as the initial model for further fine tuning or training of the neural networks or for the given problem. So that is referred to as transfer learning. Transfer learning is very usually it's very difficult, or for other say one kind of feed forward neural network or any machine learning models, this is not very applicable. However, for convolution neural networks, it is seen or observed that transfer learning very effectively works. In fact, it is one of the by default model that we usually consider. Say if we want to perform a object detection task, okay, and or object image segmentation task or some other task, the model that is trained on classification for classification is used as the base model. So that's because convolutional neural networks are not meant only for classification. They are also mainly meant for feature extraction as well. So they effectively extract features. They know, or they design the kernels, or they learn the kernels which will extract features. Okay, so irrespective of images, also they extract reasonable features. However, if we have at least some data representation of the current problem or the application scenario is required. So if we have assumed that if we have some data of the say problem at hand, and we have another big data to train before. So first we train a model with the big data, whatever is available, whatever say ImageNet data or any not data that we have. And the model that is trained with that large data can be fine-tuned for the given application or the data corresponding to given application. So fine-tuning can be done in different ways. One way is, say for example, if we have actually very small data of the application at hand, better not, we may not do fine-tuning as well. If there is a similarity between the training data that large scale data that we have and the application at hand, then no need to fine-tune as such, but we may take the features of the pre-final layer. Usually in a CNN, say if this is the image, okay, and you have different convolution layers, pooling layers, okay, as you can see here, and then convolution layers, pooling layers. Finally, what we have will be the fully connected layers. These are just like a feed-forward neural network. Whatever you get here will be vectorized, okay, and then you have some feed-forward neural network like this, okay, connecting the whole thing, W1, W2, and so on. Okay, so this, what we do is, these we consider it as the features. Okay, learned from the CNN. Say if we train this on ImageNet, and there are assume that two data sets. One is ImageNet. Okay, other is say for example MNIST. This is digit classification. Okay, and of course, this is a simple task, but still I'm using just for the change of data sets. This is image classification. Or otherwise, you can consider image classification as one task and face versus non-face. Okay, or human versus non-human. Okay, classification task. Okay, in such case, what we may have, we may train the network initially with this ImageNet. Okay, but this data assume that is small. So what do we do now? So, but we may assume that these are all roughly the natural images. So we may assume that the variability of data is not too high. In that case, what we may happen is we extract the features, that is 1000 cross 1 vector, and give this 1000 cross 1 vector, okay, of all the training samples and test samples for this application. Okay, so we extract as if it is a feature extraction. So for all these, if we have 500 samples, okay, of these two classes, extract these features, feature vector, for all the 500 samples. Okay, and then train what? Train a one-dimensional feed-forward neural network independently. So this is not with this. Okay, so train simple machine learning model. Now this can be a neural network. So taking 1000 cross 1 as the input. Okay, and then say whatever 2 cross 1 as output. Okay, so 2 class classification if we consider. Or you can train a neural, instead of neural network, you can train an SVM, support vector machine, or decision trees. Okay, so whatever. So you can consider a simple neural network, simple machine learning model. Okay, and then train it. This is one kind of transfer learning, where we have actually enough data. Sorry, where we have actually some similarity between the training data, that's use large training data that we have, and the test data or the application data that we need. Okay, if there is similarity, but the data is small here. Okay, we don't have large data, only 500 samples. Okay, so on the other hand, if we assume that if we have say 50,000 samples, even though the objective is somewhat similar, objective means similar application. Okay, so this is also similar application, this is also similar. Here the data is small, so we used a simple ML model. Okay, on the top of features that we extract from the bigger model. Okay, so this is first strategy. Second strategy is where we have actually similar objective but little larger training data, better training data. So in that case, what we do is we may use this training data to back propagate and train the last layer first, at least the last layer. If we have even more data, we may fine tune the last few layers. Okay, so like that, we based on the data availability, we may fine tune more and more. Okay, so we may only train that, or we may train these two as well. Okay, and then what we do, we use the full neural network for testing. So this is fine tuning. Fine tuning what? The CNN itself, mainly fully connected layers of CNN. Okay, so this is other procedure. And these are all under transfer learning, right? So if the data is different, this is the case where data is same. Assume that this is ImageNet classification data, and now data what we have is say probably medical imaging data. Our objective is different. So in that case, what do we do? So we can, even if objective is different, okay, so if we have very small data, then it may not be able to learn from one data set to other data set. So we need to just experiment and see it may work or it may not work. Okay, if But if we have large data, say reasonably big, like it's not as large as this, but we have actually reasonable data. So for this objective, then what we do? We again do retraining of, we start with fine tuning. And if we have even bigger data, okay, we may do retraining. Retraining means even we can go up to the whole network. Okay, training the net with the new data. So initially we trained with the ImageNet. We use that as the starting point. Okay, so that we in the cost function, wherever, even with this different cost function will come with a new data, with new objective. Okay, different cost function will come. But however, we may still be at a good location in the cost space with respect to the minima for going towards a better local minima or global minima. So that can be done either through fine tuning or retraining. So this is what is discussed here. Small data, when we have reinitialize and train, okay, rest of the layers will be freezed in the sense that if we give the input, same whatever the kernels we had here, same kernels will be working even up to here. Weight elements are kernels. Okay, so if we have actually more data, you've trained more number of layers. Okay, and this is what is being discussed even here. So very little data. If you have, but the different problem, very similar problem means you just use the linear classifier. Okay, if it is very different problem means you can still use a linear classifier, but it may not work or may work partially. If you have quite a lot of data of similar data set, you fine tune few layers. Okay, and quite a lot of data with different data sets, fine tune large number of layers or the whole network itself, if we have enough data. Yeah, is this clear? In fact, as we mentioned, the like transfer learning is applicable from one task to other task. In fact, all the CNNs, okay, which will use in other higher image processing or computer vision applications, are initialized through the CNN, that same CNN trained with the ImageNet dataset for classification. So it's by default rule, because they extract the features well. So are there any questions here? Yeah, that's what these slides are referring to. Yeah. Any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, then I will probably very briefly discuss the idea of the next class. If you have any questions, this is good time to ask. Okay, so overall now we have discussed about neural networks training and convolutional neural networks training. We have seen from the initialization and then understanding how the loss behaves to regularization and then model ensemble kind of techniques for effective learning. We also have seen about the optimization function used for training. So given all this, assume that we know how to train a neural network and convolutional neural network. Now the question is, see, in neural networks anyway, we have discussed that the number of neurons, how many should be input number of neurons, how many should be output number of neurons, and how many should be the hidden neurons. So hope you people remember. Now what we want to do is how the neural network architecture for convolutional neural networks should be. That's the point of discussion now. So if we have a convolutional neural networks, as you know, so we start from some set of layers. Okay, and we have actually convolution layer and then subsampling layer, and we may have again convolution layer and then subsampling layer. Okay, and then we may have a fully connected layer. Okay, and then we may have an output layer. Like this, there will be several layers that happens. This is conv layer. Okay, this is again subsampling layer, sampling layer, I may call, and this is actually convolution layer again, and then sampling layer, and then fully connected layer, and output layer. Anyway, output, right? So this we may have this like this. So the question now is, how many kernels should we have? Okay, so how many kernels? So then the are how many maps? How many kernels means how many maps? At each layer. And what is the dimension of kernels? These are all in some sense design parameters, but we should have some idea of how they should be. And then the third thing is how the network should be. Okay. And these essentially, these are the things that are being guided, are being researched and then inferred by the developments. In fact, there is a challenge, as I said, ImageNet challenge. It is being launched from 2010. Okay, so in 2012, if we see, okay, the conventional methods are there up to 2010 to 2012. So the accuracies are the errors if we see now. Okay, so there is the accuracy or the error I am drawing here. 25% of the error used was there in 2010, which is through not deep neural networks or deep convolution neural networks. The convolution neural networks came into play in 2012. So the errors came down from 25% to roughly 16%. Okay, by the time the convolution neural networks are used. So the drop of accuracy or drop of error is roughly close to 10%. Okay, with the advent of convolution neural networks. That's where is like the craze for the convolution networks has gone on in the computer vision community. And it's also applicable for machine learning community. So, and from then on, people started focusing on how the architecture should be for learning effectively the feature extraction and then anyway classification being main role here. Okay, so for this, the key step, if you see, how is learning is done through what? Weight elements. So are the delta W, okay, properly updated or not? This is one of the main thing. Okay, so second main thing, this is the first thing. Second main thing that is people addresses is, are we effectively learning good features? Who will ensure are we learning good features or not? So we should learn features, okay, at multiple scales, from multiple scales. Okay, and with different, say, different combination of features, that is feature fusion. Okay, so are we learning in this effective way? So this is basically driven from the image processing community. Because if we have an image, whatever image we have, okay, so the image may not every time occur in the same scale. And there may be several images or several objects in the image, which may need to be looked at different scales. Okay, and different especially different resolutions. So this features, extracting these features of this object at high resolution may be easy. Okay, because the object at low resolution, if you see at a small neighborhood, if you see only some part of the features only you can extract. Okay, but whereas this, if you see in high resolution, that means the whole scale or whole image scale, you will not be able to see this object. This has to be extracted at in sense that in a small vicinity or small scale or low resolution, right? So what essentially is happening is in sense that when we reduce the dimensions, it's opposite, because you have to extract these features of this object, okay, in the high resolution image. Okay, but this in the low resolution image means, say if you downsample, this is 100 cross 100. Okay, so you can extract the features either in 100 cross 100 or 50 cross 50 or in 25 cross 25. If you downsample to 25, then extract features, you may get the whole features of this. Okay, but this will be lost. This object is completely lost. Okay, so that's one way of looking at different scales. Or if you see actually the overall, this has to be looked at in a large scale. Okay, large scale is more appropriate here rather than writing resolution. Yeah. So you have to extract in large scale the features of this, in small scale the features of this. Okay. So for that, what people do is there are different tricks and techniques that are proposed. So the development of architectures has happened from 2012 more effectively, because the first network that is referred to as AlexNet has demonstrated very good performance. And finally, by 2018, okay, roughly, the accuracies in image classification or the errors has come down to say 2%, or accuracy has gone to 98%. Against the like if we give humans to assess, okay, all these 1.5 million images, okay, the error made by this survey is around 5%. So these deep neural networks extract and classify in a given image classification task much effective than human observers, because the object classes are very challenging and so on. But however, these are very effective in learning if we have good data sets and good representatives of the samples of different classes. For that, the two key, there have been development in each year, okay, on the architectures. So the developments mainly focused on, as I mentioned, one is on the how do we effectively update the gradients at all, say delta K or delta Ws, okay, at all layers. Because if we have a 100-layer network, the back propagation has to happen to the first layer and update. That's one thing. Second thing is how do we look at the image or the features at different scales and extract better features. We will focus on these two in the subsequent lectures. Okay, and give you the evaluation of neural network architectures. Thank you. If you have any quick question, you can ask. Otherwise, we can conclude now. Yeah, thank you.